You guys both chill the f*** out.
I'm quite chill.
You're not chill.
I'm quite chill.
You are not chill.
I am chill.
You are not chill.
I'm absolutely chill. Yeah.
You just fucking...
I said Jesus Christ. I say Jesus Christ.
No.
Dude.
I wasn't offended.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Watchmen, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Watchmen. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, the King Bee.
Hello, friends.
And Roger Roper.
Now sponsored by Costco Stepladders.
And this is our bonus Newsstand edition where we look back on the top listener emails and voicemail for the week. Again, this week's episode was episode 6 of Watchmen, This Extraordinary Being. And we got a slew of emails coming in. Thanks everyone who's been writing in at host@shatontv.com. Again, we'll do our best to get through all of the email. If you don't hear your email on the podcast, that's okay. It still will be on the website, shatontv.com. Just go to the Watchmen section and then the Newsstand section. And some of these emails have been truncated for airtime, but they appear in their entirety on the website. So Raj, King B, we got together for an Instacast and a deep dive this week. And now it is time for the Newsstand listener mail. We got a lot of email coming in about this episode, episode 6, but there was still some email coming in about previous episodes regarding Lookingglass.
Yeah, again, I think Lookingglass was a fan favorite, and I think people are worried about him in the last episode, knowing that, you saw the 7th Cavalry goons after he watched the video. Seems like he was being used by Senator Keene, and, I think people are afraid because he is a fan favorite. Is he off? Is he alive? What was his motivation in doing that? Has he flipped? Has he turned? And I think it's a testament to the acting by Tim Blake Nelson. King B, I know that Lookingglass is a huge character for you in the series.
That would appear to be correct, yes.
So are you worried about him at all?
No, I think that he's got some fail-safe measures. His ability to kind of plan for the unforeseen, it extends beyond just squid. He's interested in the facts. He knows that there's external threats out there, and he's got some sort of thing prepared. He's ready for these guys.
My favorite fan theory right now is that Lube Man is going to come to the rescue. If you believe that Lube Man is Petey, and Raj, you mentioned out of the Peteypedia that Laurie Blake had sent Petey to go check on Wade, there's a possibility that Lube Man could come to the rescue.
Again, I think King B would be annoyed if there's more Lube Man, but I think the fans are kind of demanding it, right? At this point is, again, it's one of those Easter eggs that if there's no more Lube Man, I'd be perfectly happy though, just the way that it is.
Lube Man's stupid. If it's Petey, I'm just fucking annoyed. You know what? Maybe he shows up somewhere later on, but he's not Petey. Please don't fucking be Petey. Please don't be Petey. Please don't be Petey.
All right. Well, that brings us to our first email of this newsstand. It comes from Matthew, who writes in, Wade is the worst cop ever. He comes upon what seems like a 7th Cavalry hideout crawling with these terrorists. And instead of waiting for backup, he goes in there by himself and just for good measure goes in without his mask so the entire 7th Cavalry can find out his identity. Either he is a terrible cop or this is some very lazy writing. And that comes from Matthew.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely fair. I think if you're looking at this character throughout that episode, you get a picture of who he is and what has driven and motivated him. This is another instance where he's been deceived by a female, and that carries some weight with this dude. I think he's just overcome by this desire to sort of bring justice or to kind of confront this matter head on. That, yeah, maybe he does throw caution to the wind. I don't think that makes him the worst cop ever. All you got to do is turn on your news to find worst cop ever. You get about 4 a day. I think he's just really driven and passionate, and he's got this sort of fury inside of him to confront these issues.
As we started the podcast, Lookingglass seems to, up until this episode, be that by the book character, doing everything right. I guess that's why Matthew wrote the emails, because it seems out of his character. Maybe it was lazy writing. I tend to agree more with you, though, in that perhaps he was overcome with emotion. We know that for all of his logic and all of his by the book, preparation and preparedness, he can also be overcome because of that trauma that he experienced, and maybe those emotions sometimes blind us and make us do things that we normally wouldn't have done. So I think it's actually brilliant writing. I tend to agree with King B's assessment on this.
Thanks, Matthew, for your letter. Next up, we have one from Brendan, and he says, I know, of course, that reflectitine is not tin or aluminum foil, but physics has an ironic joke for us. Apparently, wearing foil headgear to protect oneself from government or other radio waves actually amplifies those waves. And he links us to an article in The Atlantic that points out that tinfoil hats would actually make it easier for the government to track your thoughts. He says, Lookingglass, mask, and hat and behavior, including and maybe especially the Friends of Nemo group, as well as the alarm system and photography, are all examples of supposedly protective behavior that reinforces and even amplifies the paranoia. I think all of us on the Shat crew were super excited when we saw the reflectitine appear, because we've been applying the term of tinfoil theories through Game of Thrones, especially through Westworld. And now we have kind of a new thing to call it for Watchmen. But this is a longtime symbol of paranoia. And I love that they brought it into the show, both as a symbol of Wade's paranoia about the trauma that he experienced, and also about the idea of capitalizing on others' fears, aspirations, and thoughts. So here we see the most wealthy and powerful people in this world of Watchmen are people who are able to capitalize on the collective fear or aspirations of the people around them, whether it's Lady Trieu or Adrian Veidt.
It's a reflection of our current society. Turn on any kind of super channel with the bakers, where they're selling doomsday prep kits, and you go to InfoWars and other conspiracy sites, and it's all they're selling gold bullion and ways to have bug out bags.
I was recently on a date with a girl who had asked me how I felt about chemtrails from airplanes. And that was the end of that date. Do you guys have coworkers or are there people in your lives that have ever discussed that conspiracy theory? And did you punch them in the mouth immediately?
I've never had the chemtrails thing, but essential oils is something that shows up on my Instagram a lot. And then also anti-vaxxers are abundant in my life, including my sister, who is a physician. And that worries me greatly.
Oh, my God.
Thanks, Brendan, for your letter. Next up, we have a duo of letters coming in from the Jehovah's Witness contingent. And the first one comes in from Charlie, who says, Hi, love the show. I'm a Jehovah's Witness in the UK, so hence a Bible student, but I'm also on the level. Regarding the Cal comments about death, the Bible actually says in Genesis 3:19, from dust you came and from dust you will return. So I was amazed at how accurate his comments were compared to the rest of all Christianity, who keep talking about you going to heaven. Remembering we are dust. Thanks for bringing so many eggs to mind. I missed so much in the program. Charlie. And the next one comes in from Mike, who says, Hi, guys. As a former Jehovah's Witness from around 85 to 93, this episode really resonated with me. It reminded me of the opening scenes of The Leftovers, Season 3, Episode 1, which shows a end-of-days Christian sect preparing for the rapture. The preacher or pastor in that episode has various numerology evidence to provide the day on which this will occur. As the event fails to happen, he reworks the dates and calculations to arrive at a new date, which also fails, and his church diminishes in numbers as his predictions prove wrong time and time again. This numerology, as well as signs of the times, are and were very prevalent with Jehovah's Witnesses, especially in the 1980s, where the Cold War loomed large. The basic premise was that nation would rise against nation was a direct precursor to Armageddon. Jehovah's Witnesses of this era genuinely believed, and probably still believe, that the end was very imminent. In the world of Watchmen, with its alternative history timeline, it seems nuclear war was really about to break out. To a Jehovah's Witness living in this world, it would seem the end was near, and groups of them out and about preaching the good news would definitely be happening. As a young Jehovah's Witness of that era, I can safely say that Wade's experience of women would be as bad as the show points out. It's not just that it's against his religion to have sex before marriage, but he also would have no friends at all who are not Jehovah's Witnesses. The only young women he would know would be fellow Jehovah's Witness women who are as uptight as he is. I can see how a worldly woman, as the one who leads him astray, would be difficult for him to turn down, as his naivete allows him to fall for what clearly to us is a piss take. When he loses all his clothes and then the squid kills everyone, he would have been very freaked out. To him, he has sinned just at the point God has started Armageddon. He's basically screwed up royally. Keep up the great work, Mike.
It's kind of the equivalent to that video where the girl is in the track meet and the gun fires, starting the race. Everyone else takes off running and she trips over her own feet and falls directly on her face. Gets up, takes half a step, trips and falls again. It's not a good look when the Lord comes a-calling.
Do you guys know a lot of Jehovah Witnesses, like in your personal lives? Do you have any friends?
I mean, not people who are openly Jehovah's Witnesses. If they are, I don't know it. So if you're a friend of mine and you're listening to this podcast and I didn't notice, sorry about that.
I mean, I guess maybe I've known a couple when I was in elementary school, but I'm not close. In Phoenix, in Mesa, there's a huge contingency of Mormons. And Gene, you're friends with a lot of Mormons. Are they similar, Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses?
Oh no! I mean, they have completely.
No, they're different.
Okay. They have completely different belief structures. And Jehovah's Witness, like, they can drink. Mormons don't drink. Jehovah's Witness, they don't celebrate pagan holidays.
Okay.
Where I believe Mormons can. So like Mormons can have like a Christmas tree. Jehovah's Witness, not so much. So they have completely different belief structures. They're both, I think, would fall under the umbrella of like Christian offshoots.
They're not the ones that are standing outside of concert venues or sporting events saying the end is near and you must repent, right? That's not them.
They're the ones that have the little booklets called the Watchtower that they hand out. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I would say that amongst younger Jehovah's Witnesses and younger Mormons, there definitely is an issue of kind of struggling with what every other young kid is kind of getting into, drugs and sex and things like that. I grew up Mormon adjacent. I was kind of a wayward runaway that went and stayed with a Mormon family for a while and, made out with a couple of Mormon girls way back in the day. And there's definitely a weird sort of guilt that rules them after the fact. So the scene where he's, reacting to his immediate sin is, I mean, that's pretty accurate in how, they sort of react to this, like, I've made a mistake, and they just don't have that ability to really deal with it and move forward.
Thanks, Mike and Charlie, for your letters. And the last Lookingglass email we have comes in from Peter. Peter writes, was anyone else slightly confused why Lookingglass decided to dramatically throw his interdimensional alarm in the trash, only to go back and take it out? By throwing it out, I thought it painted a great picture of his mental state changing. From all indication, the video he saw of Ozymandias liberated him from his past fears and anxiety completely. Am I missing something? Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, I think what he's missing is that old habits are hard to break, right? Like, even though you may have been told the truth, you still fall into the things that give you comfort, which in a lot of ways are movements, different habits that you form that make you relax. This is especially common like in individuals that are highly OCD, right? They have a checklist that they go through so they can feel comfortable. And I think for someone like this, who's kind of on edge and has lived with this his entire life, it gives him comfort, even though he knows everything's a ruse.
When I was an RA at Arizona State University, one of the things that they trained us on is how to be on the lookout for someone who was likely to commit suicide. And one of the things that they taught us was if somebody has a great deal of anxiety and a great deal of mental or emotional anguish, and then you see them relaxed all of a sudden, if you see them kind of at peace with the world, that's a giveaway that they might be ready to kill themselves. And part of that is because all of the anxiety about how to get on with life for the rest of your life just went away as you made the decision to end it. The point being, though, that if you are a doomsdayer, if you believe the world is going to end, if you like Wade think the next squid attack is coming, there is a weird comfort in that because you don't have to worry about life after that. You just have to plan for that event. And so there are people, it's a weird twist of psychology, who, when they become that invested in Doomsday, that invested in God's wrath or Armageddon, where that gives them a sense of peace. And you can almost even relate it to the environmental struggle. You know, there are a lot of people right now who are, say, climate change deniers, and they're like, fuck it, I want to have, fuck a Prius. I want my truck that's going to belch out, diesel smoke, and I'm going to just destroy everything I fucking can, because it's an easier thing to deal with. If you go, yeah, fuck it, the world's going to end, let's have some fun. That's a lot easier than what are the serious conversations and sacrifices we have to make to keep things going.
So you're saying those people are just lazy?
No, I'm not saying they're lazy. I'm saying it's psychologically easier to say fuck it than to be mature and have to actually come up with a solution. So I think in the case of Lookingglass, though, that's his comfort.
Agreed.
The idea that that's what he has to plan for is his comfort. And also, Peter, psychology isn't clean. Like, it's just not that simple. You don't just get your mind changed. Even when evidence is presented to people directly, it doesn't necessarily change their minds completely.
I think that's why it's very difficult for some people to accept other political ideas, is because that's become their identity, their structure. When all of that comes crashing down, as it's proven or you provided evidence that your identity is wrong, you're like, who am I? What do I do now? Have I wasted my life? And that's why people are resistant to change.
Thanks, Peter, for your email. Next, we're going to move on to a letter that came in defense of Roger, and it comes from Ben in California. And Ben writes, it seems more apt to label Judd Crawford more as Martin Luther King's description of the white moderate rather than the benevolent racist. I could see how, quote, I'm trying to fucking help you people, end quote, could easily be interpreted as benevolent racism. But personally, I think that's an unfair representation to paint Crawford with. The pilot episode clearly reveals Crawford's relationship with Angela as not just close, but more importantly, genuine. He was fine with a black subordinate sitting in his chair, resting her feet on his desk, and drinking out of his mug as if she owned his office. They shared joyful family dinners, and Angela's kids called him Grandpa. They went on double dates. His reaction to her unlawfully kidnapping a man was mild disappointment. There's a trust between them. I don't believe the storytelling ever implied that Crawford harbored some ulterior motives toward black people, else they'd have hinted at that through any of those scenes. In contrast, episode 6 was structured to follow Will's life from his cadet origin to Crawford's death. Will's, quote, I know you, end quote, line to Judd with the okay dog whistle illusion seemed like a really obvious declaration that Will was letting his past calcify his views of Judd. Here, as Judd dies and the nostalgia trip ends, there's a detail that a lot of viewers seem to neglect. There's a thematic callback to the speech at Will's cadet ceremony at the start of the trip. The uniform a man wears changes him. Make sure yours changes you for the better. Maybe I'm reaching, but I think the writers are playfully hinting that this line is not just regarding Will's police or heroes uniforms, but to Judd's cavalry uniform. The parallels and juxtaposition between Will and Judd seem too obvious to me, and the sequence flooded with imagery of their badges and suits. I'd argue the point of the episode was don't judge a man by their past or mask. Will might not be a good guy. Judd might not be a bad guy.
What if Judd is being blackmailed? Maybe his legacy has caught up with him and he's being used because he feels that maybe he could control the situation. And also maybe he's being threatened with something. So he's taking this upon his shoulders and trying not to involve anyone else. And that's why he martyrs himself, if you will.
Sounds a little soap opera to me. I think it could be a lot simpler than that and still carry depth and complexity.
Because the only other explanation then would be false memories, right?
Oh, Jesus Christ. No, there's a million explanations and none of them, like, it just doesn't matter. They're just complex characters. That's the explanation.
All right, thanks, Ben, for your email. Next up, we have one from Nick, who's asking, where's Roger? It says, good afternoon. On this latest episode of Watchmen, I heard you mention Roger's thoughts on the show that he mentioned on another podcast. Is he on this podcast? Or do you guys do another podcast on the Watchmen? I love the show and the podcast. Thanks, Nick. You want to handle this one, Raj?
The beauty of the Watchmen and the rotating cast of characters is we have the ability to be flexible in our schedules. Well, except for Eugene. So it's nice, I think, to rotate in. There's sometimes where I'm available, sometimes King B is available, and it's easier on you sometimes if just to edit it and get this out on time. We may have to go down to just 2 hosts versus 3. But this week where we're able to all be part of all the recordings, it was neat and it was kind of fun. So yeah, there's no other podcast except for Shat the Movies and Watchmen.
They're the only podcast that exists, Nick. Listen to them. Always. Next up, we have one from Quinn, who writes in and says, as a queer Black woman, it's difficult for me to find podcasts about nerd culture with white men that I enjoy. Quite often, white men hosts are not woke enough and remind me of my Ole Miss days, so I don't continue to listen. Or they're too woke and are annoyingly so, and I still have to turn it off. Y'all are a good balance in that you're honest about some of the themes of Watchmen that are disturbing about white male culture, but also don't overstep in trying to analyze from a Black perspective. I've really enjoyed how y'all address your interpretation of the show without trying to do too much because, well, being Black isn't something you know about. I heard one of the Black writers of the show talk about the theme of generational trauma amongst Black people as the center of episode 6. That was amazing because as a psychotherapist that specializes in race-based trauma, that is all I've been getting from the show from the beginning. My wife and I held our breath nearly the entire scene where Will is almost lynched, then watched as his origin story played out. Never have I seen a Black, queer, flawed man who is a survivor of PTSD fighting and winning against white supremacy on TV. While this is just a show for many of your listeners, for the most marginalized amongst us, it is more than that. Hearing y'all break down the episode and add the comic book elements commentary to it is a highlight I look forward to every week. That is why I was annoyed with the on-air letter you read about the person complaining about the Instacast. If I, a gay-ass Black woman that has literally built my entire career around not centering white men in anything, can wait a few hours or days for a free podcast during holiday season, that other white man can too. Thanks for the work, Quinn. And just for the record, Quinn is a licensed professional counselor, and she did write in as a PS that she's just assuming that the other person who wrote in, JC, is a white man.
This is the best compliment I think I've ever received. I'm woke, but not too woke.
Yeah, I think we're always careful to point out that, like, as we're watching a show that is executive directed by a white man that is spending a lot of time addressing racial issues, legacy, generational trauma, that we're not trying to say that we understand this stuff completely. It is strictly from, our viewpoint, and we're doing our best to kind of piece it together. That kind of makes us a great test group, though, for is this messaging resonating with a quasi-woke audience? And I also am very flattered by the email. Thanks, Quinn.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that one, too.
Moving on from that, we have a few emails about Adrian Veidt. The first one comes from Steve. He says, congrats on another great podcast with the Watchmen series. I've been rewatching the first episodes to catch all the stuff I missed on my first viewing. It seems like the show took great pains to demonstrate that Veidt was living without electricity for the duration of his first 2 anniversaries with the manual sewing machine and typewriters. But as his 3rd anniversary sequence begins, we see him sitting in a room full of electrical lamps. Has this been addressed? Are we to assume that he found a way to generate his own power supply? Love the podcast. It's great hearing your voices again. Steve.
That's a great catch. I didn't even realize that there were manual sewing machines and I guess remember the manual typewriter, but yeah, I didn't even notice that.
Well, yeah, that when he builds his first space suit to sort of launch outside of the atmosphere, he's cobbling it together from materials that he has laying around. By the time he gets his finished suit, it actually looks to be forged by his own design. You know, he's obsessed with Alexander the Great. The character was always very drawn to, or always looking for parallels between himself and the great minds of his time. So it just seems natural to me that if this was a self-imposed exile, or even if it wasn't, that it would be very much to his character to sort of train himself in the early arts, the scientific and metallurgical arts, to get to that point. He's going to recreate society as he sees fit, and he's going to do it with the tools that he's available. He has to go through the historical methods that those things were produced to get to that point. I like it. It's just sort of, it's his rebirth.
Thanks, Steve, for your letter. Next up, we have one from Brian Fong, who's labeled his theory the best theory ever. So buckle up, guys. He says, "It is my belief that Adrian Veidt was imprisoned on the moon by none other than Robert Redfordations Redford. Yes, that's right. It is my belief that President Redford, not wanting to be under Adrian's thumb and to punish him for the lives he took from the squid attack, banished him to an off-world prison that would ensure against Adrian being able to interfere in Earth's affair. Now, the only person or people capable of creating such a prison was none other than Lady, I'm a Trillionaire, bought Ozzy's company, Trieu. Her company creates the environment and human derivative drones that will occupy this prison. Unbeknownst to Redford, Lady Trieu is an ally of Ozymandias. Ozzy is for a time content, but decides to communicate to Lady Trieu it's time to break out and enact his final plan, which she helps him with. I also believe that Ozzy met Lady Trieu in Vietnam, who as a young girl saw the horror Dr. Manhattan perpetrated on her people and wants revenge. Ozzy used that anger and his own disdain for Manhattan to groom her. Together, they create a plan that utilizes a millennium clock, lithium battery explosives, to create a conduit in space and time to go back in time where Ozzy will take Manhattan's place when he acquires his powers, which would ultimately stop any Vietnam atrocities. Sister Night comes into play because her grandfather, Will Reeves, who knows that these events are in motion already, wants to show her who she is, which is the descendant of Hooded Justice, and that she will need to accept that mantle in order to save the world, or maybe just Tulsa, from the ultimate power struggle. The end. Brian Fong.
Has King B's head exploded yet? This is a double cross with a backstab, right? You think that they're double crossing, but they're actually working together? No, I think this is the whole reason that they released the Peteypedia this week, where it goes fact or fiction and it has certain items. Like, I think Brian points out here, the Watchtower is a time device. It's a DeLorean. It's going to go back in time. They said, no, that's fake. I mean, listen, the only two people that it possibly could be that at least have the technology that we've seen in the show is Lady Trieu and Dr. Manhattan to be able to do this.
That is one way to write a television series. I'll say that. Go ahead and give us season 2, buddy. Let's see what you got.
I think we've seen some absurdities on Watchmen, but not to the point where the president would go through all this to just kill a guy. You could just kill him. That'd be a lot easier.
I guess under the conspiracy, he would say, well, I'm trying to get out from under Adrian Veidt, and I don't want people to know that, he's the reason that I'm president. So I'm gonna like a mob boss, just get rid of him by, imprisoning him on Europa. I don't know. Did you guys see Robert Redford pen an op-ed in the Washington Post? I think it was
back like early November, jumping in on the environmental issues. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, good timing, Redford.
Anyway, next up we have another Ozymandias theory. This one comes from Life. He says, Ozzy's scenes are by far the weirdest and most confusing, sure, but they're also the most intriguing. My take is that everything we've seen him do has been part of whatever his plan is. We found out this week that there are satellites around him, so it's conceivable that he's being watched 24/7. I feel like everything he's done, and I mean everything, has been part of the plan. People talk about how he's losing it. What? We see him lose it and destroy the Phillips sickle that comes back frozen. But what if he was acting, like he would do in a play, like how he was shown to have written a play? He antagonizes the game warden, seemingly over years, to make it seem like he's slowly going crazy. What if that too is part of the play? Yeah, it may seem crazy that he massacred every Crookshanks and Philippi, but then he literally uses all those bodies to write out a message, and that is just coincidentally moments after he exits whatever magical illusion is holding him. I don't buy it. Maybe we're shown the video to remind us all and clue us all in as to the fact that this crazy son of a bitch knows how to plan. Right or wrong, he did kind of stop the Cold War, and he set things in motion for Redford to be made president 7 years later. 7. And he flat out says in a very confident manner, no, Miss Crookshanks, it's only just begun, once he starts the performances. I'm rambling, but my take is that all the crazy is playing out like this because he is pulling the strings in order to, okay, so I haven't quite figured that part out yet. I don't know why he is there. I don't know why I think Dr. Manhattan is the reason he is there, or I think that this message was actually to Dan Dreiberg. I just know I think Ozymandias is plotting crazy shit again. And that comes from Life. I mean, this sits better with me than the other theory, than Brian's, but that he's playing crazy. I mean, I'm not saying it's reasonable. Sure. I'm saying it's more reasonable. There's at least evidence here that we've seen on screen. At the same time, I do want to take a moment to address this whole idea that for people who were not familiar maybe with the graphic novels or didn't really understand that this guy's supposed to be a bad guy. He did kill 3 million people. The Cold War was not inevitable. It was something that he thought would happen, and he killed 3 million people to avoid the deaths of others. But I feel like there's been this drumbeat of like Ozymandias was a good thing for the world, and I just want to push back against that a little bit.
You gotta crack a few eggs, right, to make an omelet. The short term goals, lead to long term profits.
I think the notion that he's losing it isn't entirely accurate. I mean, he is in complete solitude in the sense that he doesn't view Crookshanks or Phillips as humans or company. They're just furniture. He's mostly talking to himself. And, when he kind of loses his temper and stomps on a corpse or something like that, I mean, you're allowed to have a bad day in half a decade of solitude and confinement. You're going to yell and curse and you're going to have outbursts. I don't think that that's that abnormal.
I think King B and I have agreed upon that perhaps the most logical explanation for Mr. Phillips is that he's made in the image of Dr. Manhattan. And he said he's not the maker of those clones. That would be cruel. And he doesn't agree with it. So I think if he named his whole play The Watchmaker's Son, we know that the Watchmaker's Son was Dr. Manhattan. So I think it makes sense that either he's imprisoned by Dr. Manhattan or Lady Trieu is using Dr. Manhattan and to form this prison, but he's trying to reach out to Dr. Manhattan to save him.
If there were ever two characters that were more opposed to each other, I think Ozymandias and Dan Dreiberg, they had that standoff in the original Watchmen, which King B pointed out, where Dan Dreiberg got his ass kicked. Next up, we're moving on to Lady Trieu, and our first letter comes from Chris, who writes, "Hey guys, since it's been confirmed Lady Trieu is responsible for the drug nostalgia, I feel more confident in a theory I have regarding her daughter. I don't think anyone doubts that Lady Trieu's daughter is most likely a clone of herself. It's all well and good to want another version of yourself, but it can never truly happen because who you are is more than DNA. I believe Lady Trieu is shaping her daughter with nostalgia. By exposing her daughter to her own traumatic experiences, Lady Trieu may expect her psyche to be more closely aligned with her own. I'm sure the genetic trauma scene was introduced as a red herring. The fact that nostalgia exists for real, is intended only for the genetic owner, is controlled by Lady Trieu, her daughter is IV'd at night and wakes up with someone else's memories, are all evidence that Lady Trieu is using it on her daughter. Thanks, guys. Chris."
Do you think Lady Trieu's daughter is a clone of herself or the mother?
One of the things that Lindelof cautioned against twice, actually, in the official Watchmen podcast is referring to things as clones. The idea being that just because something has similar genetic makeup, similar DNA, doesn't make it a clone. And part of what he was saying was that like Phillips and Crookshanks, although they always appear the same and they're kind of farmed out of that that life pond, he cautioned against calling them clones. I think what they prefer here is like genetically engineered beings.
Right. They're genetic copies. It's like multiplicity, right? There's just couple little things that are off with each being, and they have really no soul. They have no brain because they're not shaped by the experiences. And I think maybe that's where Lady Trieu is, utilizing her drug nostalgia maybe to give BN a personality, this genetic copy that she's made.
Thanks, Chris, for your letter. Next up, we have one from Butler Toll, who says, "Hi, guys. We know that Lady Trieu bought the Clark farm and land because she knew that a meteor or craft was going to fall on that property. Could her company be the owner of the satellite that observed Veidt on the Jupiter moon and therefore knew where he was going to land on Earth when he was returned or rescued? Also, she has a statue of him as an old man, even though he was supposed to have died fairly young. Just a random thought. Yours sincerely, Butler Toll."
For the timelines to match up here, guys, right? He would have had to have come back before she built the clock tower. And that's already built. And she's already built the phone booths, right? For at least that's what we assume in the flyover, right? It looks like this was taking time in the past. Now, if that's not the case, if this wasn't in the past, and maybe it's not because of the daughter's age is similar to how she looks in current time, it could be a returning Adrian Veidt. In terms of the satellites, yeah, that was examined in, again, the letter or the news clipping in the Peteypedia, is that she had sent out over 50 Voyager class satellites since 2010. I guess that's how long maybe it would take to get to the moon of Europa. So I think she's definitely behind the satellites. In terms of the timelines, not so certain yet.
Part of this email that I focused on was this idea of Veidt being a statue as an old man, even though he died fairly young. He's essentially an octogenarian when he disappears. So he's not young by any means. He looks in the statue exactly as he would have looked when he disappeared. So it's not like he was like 30 years old.
It's only been 7 years.
Do we have any amateur astronomers out there that could tell us how long it would take a slowly propelled craft to travel from the moon back to Earth?
From our moon?
No, from Europa or wherever he may be. Obviously, he's not going to be in the most technologically advanced craft. He's just kind of drifting along. I think there's going to be a hole in the plot as far as the travel time from one place to the next.
Or Voyager 1 was launched 16 days after Voyager 2. And that's the one that was able to go to Jupiter, Saturn, and Titan. Okay, so it was launched in 77. It made its flyby on Saturn in 1980. So the time would actually line up. It takes about 3 years to get to Jupiter, Saturn, and 3 years back.
Well, it's not like Saturn and Jupiter are right next to each other. There's quite a distance between the two.
I mean, the next planet over, right? Mary's very eager mother just served us 9 pizzas. Yeah. So Jupiter's before Saturn. So
yeah, but it's not like urban planning in suburban Florida, Raj. They're not equidistant.
No, but I'm saying Jupiter's before Saturn. So it would take even less time to get to Jupiter than it would Saturn. So the timelines could theoretically match up.
To address the previous email, if you think that he's gone a little batty on an entire planet surrounded by clones, imagine how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs he's going to be sitting in a little tin foil box for 3 years with his own poop.
Well, that brings us to our next letter that comes from Carmen, and it's another theory on what fell from the sky. She says, what if what fell from the sky on Lady Trieu's newly acquired property is actually Superman? There are plenty of hints to make this connection. The large clock she's building not only tells time, but manipulates it. It's a time machine. In another attempt to unseat or distract Dr. Manhattan by our principal villain, it's possible time-space has been altered such that the origin of Superman is now present day. And rather than being raised by a loving Midwest family, what if Superman grew up under malicious influence? Who's king in a world with Dr. Manhattan and Superman? If in the least the tower is a time machine, it opens some very interesting possibilities for a reunion with our favorite Watchmen characters. What if? And that comes from Carmen.
Do people think that it's a time machine because of Lost and David Lindelof?
I think people are just writing fan fiction at this point. Like, none of this makes sense. My favorite part of this email, Carmen, and listen, thank you for writing in. Like, we're just having fun here. But I love that she says the large clock she's building not only tells time, but manipulates it. It's a time machine. Based on what? You gotta,
because they're stealing watch batteries. So it's time. So we gotta manipulate time. That's why. It could be that, or it could be that we gotta move the island.
Let's take a spot vote though right now. Dr. Manhattan versus Superman. Who wins that fight?
Is it Dr. Manhattan versus Superman, or is it Dr. Manhattan versus Superman Red Sun, which examines what would happen if a young Superman actually fell in communist Russia and was raised to become, the Red Sun, which is what she also asks in this question. No, King B, you can answer this because isn't in current DC, Dr. Manhattan just met Superman, right?
Jesus Christ, guys. Can't anything just be one thing? Ultimately, Dr. Manhattan would win, but he'd get a black eye because Superman's sun-powered, photon-powered molecules that make up his entire body are a funky kind of energy that takes Dr. Manhattan a second to take apart. So in that moment, Superman does get a punch in, but that's fucking it.
I mean, couldn't Dr. Manhattan just also create kryptonite because he can form different molecules and just create whatever he wants?
He would get to that eventually, but he has to examine Superman's makeup, like his down to the molecular level, to determine where the weaknesses in this creation are. And then he'd go, I can just synthesize this thing that would sap out that and leave him as a thing. And but that all takes time, and Superman's really fucking fast. Shit's stupid. I'm a grown man. Thanks for writing in, though. That's very kind of you.
All right. Next up, we have a few odds and ends. The first one comes from Joel from Ontario. He says, "Hey guys, I was a little young when Lost was on the air." Oh, Lost. Here we go. "I watched it and loved it, but I didn't really understand that I could enrich my experience of the show by going on the internet and partaking in all the theorizing on forums or listening to people who truly appreciated the source material and went to great depths or research to make connections that opened up the television watching experience even more. Fast forward a few years, and being more net savvy, I found the Shat on TV podcast for Game of Thrones and then Westworld. Wow. I never listened to podcasts before, and I've tried different podcasts because of your inspiration, but I always keep coming back. Entertaining, informative, and it really sounds like you have a passion for this tireless work. Forget the naysayers. Thank you for enhancing my enjoyment of great television. Loving the Watchmen podcasts, Joel from Ontario, Canada." You want to call him a nerd there, King B?
No, it's just too damn nice. Now I kind of feel we've gotten such an outpouring of support since we read the one guy's email giving us flack. It kind of makes me feel like, guys, we weren't fishing for compliments. It's very kind, and thank you very much. It's in our nature every once in a while to bathe in some criticism just to keep ourselves humble. We really do appreciate all the listeners. So that's why Gene puts in all the hard work that he does. By the way, it's not his real name.
Listen, I love being on the podcast. I love coming in and theorizing about our favorite shows, and sometimes about shows we don't necessarily care about. And then it truly is a passion just to get the podcast out every week. But all the credit goes to Gene and Big D. They're the real driving factors behind the scenes. And without them, there would be no podcast. So all the appreciation goes over there.
Well, thanks, guys. And Raj, that's a perfect segue to our next email from John, who says, "Hey, guys, I've been listening since you started posting the shows on YouTube, analyzing each Game of Thrones episode, and I'm loving the Watchmen coverage. I had a Watchmen-related question. Are Big D and King B related? They sound almost identical."
I am the alternate timeline of Big D. In the Big D universe, he finds love and starts a family. In the King B universe, he lives his entire life alone.
It's like the question that was posed by the previous reader. It's like, what would happen if a Big D baby was dropped in two separate sides of the earth and was raised by two different factions? One would come out like Big D, the other one would come out like King B.
Left to his own devices, he hones his skills for construction and destruction.
I'll say this about King B. King B seemed to have inherited all the water skills, and Big D got none of them, because when we went kayaking down the Salt River, poor Big D just looked like he had never been in water before. He looked like a big flailing bear. He could have just walked the Salt River. That's how tall he is. But I feel bad because we made him float down the river, and he looked like he had never been inside of like a kiddie pool. That's the level of skill he had.
For people who have no idea what we're talking about, in the summer times, I have a little part-time gig. I do kayak wild horse sighting tours on a local river out here. Big D came out. It was the first time I'd met him. The guy is, how tall is he? 6'5", 6'6"?
Oh, he's 6'7".
My kayaks have I think 325-pound weight limit, and he's tap dancing on that line. In addition to that, it's just the pure leverage of a thing that large sitting above a water line. That was all my fault. I took this guy down the river on equipment that was not meant for him, and he was an absolute trooper, but had a miserable time the whole way down. He could have just waded through the river, dragging us behind him. It would have worked out much better.
Yeah, it was a great memory. I feel really bad. Because there was some lost equipment along the way, but no, King B and Big D they're not related. They are not the same person. But we love them all the same.
It would have been really fantastic, actually, if this entire podcast was just one guy just doing all the voices.
Like a Phil Hendry show.
I do have video footage of Big D taking a spill out of that kayak somewhere in an old GoPro. He's made me swear never to release it. But if you donate to my Patreon account,
that's right,
I'll release the video.
Thanks, John, for your email. And finally, we have one more email from Don Sauce, who wrote in a while ago. He says, not to get too literary, but the one-time English major in me can't help but note that the failure of this world to show an intact nuclear family calls to mind such works as The Wasteland, or one of its inspirations, The Myth of the Fisher King. In those works, the rottenness at the core of their worlds manifested in impotence, which in the days before you could steampunk Jiffy Pop a lake monster into a Miss Crookshanks meant the end of your line. Tick-tock. What he's pointing out here is essentially that everybody who has children in the modern day in 2019 doesn't seem to have them through natural means. So like Angela's got all of her kids adopted. Lady Trieu apparently has some sort of a genetically engineered child, but we don't see anybody who just has like kids.
So are they suggesting that everything is just created kind of in the same way that we create our pets?
Yeah, that basically, that this is a post natural reproduction world, which would be really interesting in that it reflects the sort of a rottenness at the core of the world.
It's possible that in this timeline, when people are so concerned that there is ever even going to be a future, that they just lose interest in having children. And maybe there just aren't as many young families on the rise as there used to be.
I mean, because we certainly see Cal and Angela having sex, but they don't have any children of their own that aren't adopted.
Well, how did those kids get made?
Ultimately, it's also a show that's not really about families or children in a young sense, so they're just not in the show. It would just be clutter.
Yeah,
but there are children in the show.
Yeah, but
they're just not.
You haven't seen them in 3 episodes.
That's true. So some other tinfoil scraps that Don's got to offer, and there's a lot of them. He says, 1, nothing can blow up Lady Trieu's vivarium except an atomic bomb, equaling Pavlov's nuke. Lookingglass has the KKK rope now, equals Pavlov's pointy hat. He says, aside from the company of non-clones, Ozymandias is missing something else, batteries. Will totally hanged Judd to start a race war in furtherance of some yet unknown goal of Lady Trieu. It would be hilarious if Lady Trieu can't actually clone shit, but just up and stole someone else's baby. The escape velocity of a fully grown lake fetus seems oddly low. The senator's planned kidnapping was staged by Lady Trieu and company for maybe some yet unknown goal. I like Trent Reznor's score, but if you haven't tried queuing up and playing the Knight Rider theme during every Sister Night scene, your life is worse than it needs to be. In this universe, Astroglide is apparently a superpower, and that all comes from our buddy Don Sauce.
I'm surprised no one has made that video yet of Sister Night vehicle. Like, like on Reddit or some other internet fandom board kind of done that. But if they haven't and you have those skills, please do that.
Our planet is literally dying and you're looking for a Knight Rider song.
Well, no, I'm looking for a video of the Knight Rider song overlaid on a certain scene of Watchmen, the HBO series that we do a podcast on.
All right. Thanks, Don, for your email. And sorry it took so long to get to it. It was just so good. And I wanted to really show that it survived the test of time. Just as a note here, that email was sent to us on November 12th. He's kind of on about some stuff.
Prognosticator of prognosticators, Don Sauce. Thank you.
I've never used Astroglide. Is it really that good?
It's not. There's a lot better stuff. Astroglide, it's too watery.
Oh, okay.
It's better than KY.
You want a water-based lubricant, don't you? Like you want
water-based, but you don't want it to be like too watery.
If I put my entire body into a skin-tight leotard and then covered myself in Astroglide, could I slide over asphalt?
I don't think so. And finally, we have a voicemail from longtime listener Ash Schlafly, who, get this, was on vacation with her husband and children out in the middle of nowhere and boosted her signal just to send in this voicemail to us.
Hey guys, Ashley Schlafly here. I am calling you from the middle of a beautiful 36-acre farm in the middle of hill country, and I thought I wouldn't be able to watch Watchmen this week, but we were able to boost our service enough to stream it this morning. And I can't type an email at the moment, but I wanted to call in with just a couple of thoughts. So look, in a show that's shown us and prioritized legacy, I think we as responsible viewers need to look at our own legacies. I think part of the reckoning with things in the past is kind of this idea that if we admit that our legacy is something beyond ourselves, then we realize that our legacy as a people is what we allow as a people to happen or are subject to happening. So for example, the Tulsa riot and all of a post-Civil War America is kind of an example of that. It's a legacy of those that harm and those that are subject to harming. And our part in it affects everyone differently. For example, it's part of Will's legacy in a different way than it's a part of Judd's family's legacy. Whether we are subject to or a participant to the type of hate like seen in the Tulsa race riots determines the imprint that those moments that define our people's legacy, the imprint that they have on our DNA, as we discussed in previous episodes. It shapes whether or not our legacy is pain, whether or not our legacy is anger and hate, or whether or not it's a legacy of privilege like Judd has experienced. But this show, if it's taught us anything, is that the worst and most burdensome legacy is the experience of being told that our greatest legacy is not to have one, or that we're not deserving of having one, like we've seen some of the African American characters on this show and in real life have received and have been at the receiving end of. Look, if you've ever been to the lynching museum that exists here in this country, it's an example of such a pained legacy. There are these blocks hanging from the ceiling that represent all of the men and women and children that were lynched in early 20th century and post-Civil War America. The blocks hanging from that ceiling represent a legacy of people who were put upon, a legacy of people who were disenfranchised, a legacy of people who were murdered. And the greatest privilege is to be a part of the group that can stand beneath those symbolic feet and to have not been a part and would have never been a part of the stone shown within. That's why the scene of the attempted lynching is so powerful, I think, this episode. Normally, when we see lynching, we see it as spectators. We're rendered the watcher. But when we see it this time, it's seen from a point of view. We see it through the eyes of Will, through Angela being attempted to be lynched, and all of a sudden we moved from sympathizing to empathizing because we see what it was like for those individuals we may have not have shared such a legacy with. And, Laurie says this episode that we aren't meant to live in others' life, but isn't that kind of part of the problem? When our own experience is prioritized over the masses, when we're set to believe that one group of people's legacy is more important than another's, that it doesn't matter what one person's legacy is. What matters is the amalgam, the combination, and the complete and total totality of all of our legacies and what in the end it tells us is our legacy as a people. And in closing, with regard to the overall question of whether or not these memories are real, I'm reminded of Vonnegut's opening to a similar story of, being unstuck in time and memories not being sure whether or not they're valid or not. And that's Slaughterhouse-Five, my very favorite book. It opens with the line, all of this happened more or less. And I think that right there tells us the point of this, is that all of this happened more or less. It doesn't matter if it's all real. It's real enough. And the reality is, any form of a legacy, it's carried on. And Angela hasn't had it imprinted upon her and carries it as well. She carries Will's legacy as a cop, as a watchman, as a human. And what she does with it and how she chooses to change or sustain such legacy, that I think is where the truly interesting conclusions are going to come. Hope you guys have had a great week. Thanks for everything you did. I think that email about you having to do the Instacast was bullshit for what it's worth. I think your opinions are great. I don't care how late they come. Happy Thanksgiving. See y'all later.
Talk about the breakdown of the nuclear family, the fact that she's taking time away from hers and a beautiful 36-acre farm to send us in that beautiful email. She's way smarter than I am.
For listeners who aren't familiar with Ash, she does have her own podcast coming out in 2020 along with her husband called No Need to Argue. And she's also been featured on several different podcasts, including Dana Buckler's show. Super, super smart stuff. And I'm always kind of astounded at the level of detail she can do in a breakdown. Quite different from what we do over here. And so it's very helpful to have her voice on there. The thing that stood out to me was this idea that I'd never heard before, but Ashley makes a great case for it, is the idea of a legacy of privilege, right? With regards to Watchmen, we've greatly considered the legacy of pain, of oppression, and the legacy of being hamstrung by things that happened in the past. I don't think we've ever really looked at the other side of it, which is the legacy of privilege. And you do have several characters, including Judd Crawford, including Senator Keene, who do benefit from that side of it. And I think that after hearing Ashley's voicemail, I will be looking at the show a little bit differently. I also had no idea that there's a lynching museum. So thank you for that horrible bit of knowledge.
You know, it was even more horrible is when I think the Swedish gaming company created the game to teach kids about the evils of slavery, but they did it by making a Tetris game made out of different shapes of slaves. Did you see this?
This is about American slavery?
Yeah, about the slave trade in general. They created like a game where each slave had its own like little Tetris piece, and they were like contorted different slaves, and
you got to fit them in a boat.
You had to fit them in a boat. Yep. And someone thought that would be a good educational tool. Artistic depictions are probably a better way to showcase that.
Is it shitty of me that I just go, well, I don't ever want to see that. That sounds.
I think you have to confront it. You know, I think.
Well, yeah. But can I confront it from the outside?
I think that's part of what Ashley's saying though here is by going to those museums, similar to like with our own legacies, you have to confront them, and what you do with them ultimately is what makes up the continued legacy. You have to understand the past. You have to confront it to really truly understand what your legacy will be carrying forward to those who you leave behind and touch. So yeah, you kind of do have to confront it.
So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. From Shat on TV to you. Well, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Watchmen Newsstand. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcasts. The website is shatontv.com. You can email us at hosts@shatontv.com or voicemail at 914-719-SHAT. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies. We've been working very hard to keep that going at the same time. Big D is burning the midnight oil, working very hard on that show while we work on this show. And there's a bit of crossover there. We're doing a lot of great shows. Thankfully, people are commissioning episodes, and that's really raised the quality of movies we've been watching lately.
Agreed. Yeah, we just recently did Scarface. And listen, I know a lot of people may skip over certain movies that they've never seen or they don't plan on seeing, but don't skip out on LA Story. That's one of my favorite episodes we've recently done. And so, yeah, go check it out. Shatthemovies.com. You can find all our back catalog there.
Also, King B and I got some feedback on our coverage of UHF, Weird Al's 1989 comedy. And we're told that we sounded very professional.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a job offer actually out of it. I declined because, jobs are for suckers, but it was nice to be wanted.
No, it was fun. I listened to it on the way back from Orlando. It was a good podcast. You guys did a good job.
On behalf of my co-hosts, the King Bee and Roger Roper, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Sunday night for our Instacast coverage of Watchmen Episode 7. and almost religious awe.